What's up, everybody? This is Kim from Keynecht. Let's talk about where you should actually park your truck this week. Because here's the thing. Last week's freight market was all over the place national averages. They'll tell you the market's lukewarm. Load-to-truck ratios? Decent on paper. But if you're making decisions based on those numbers, you're missing where the real money is hiding. I'm going to show you exactly where capacity got tight last week, where rates actually moved, and more importantly, where you need to position your equipment in the next 7 to 10 days to capitalize on what's coming. And I'm going to tell you about a driver I know, Carlos, who made one positioning decision last week that cost him $3,000 in lost revenue. By the end of this, you'll know how to avoid making the same mistake. Let's get into it. All right, so here's what the national data is telling us. First week of November, and the spot market is showing mixed signals. Dry van load-to-truck ratio, 5.8 loads per truck. That sounds decent, right? It's not. It dropped 14% last week because truck posts jumped 6% while load posts fell 4%. Translation, more capacity chasing fewer loads. Reefers sitting around 12 loads per truck. Softer than it should be for Thanksgiving week. We'll talk about why that's weird in a minute. Flatbed, 21.6 loads per truck. Still the strong horse, even though it's cooling off from September when we were seeing 30-to-1 ratios. But here's what matters. Spot rates are 2 to 4% higher than this time last year across all equipment types. We've officially bottomed out from the 2024 disaster. But, and this is critical, we're still below long-term averages and nowhere near 2021-2022 levels. So if you're looking at these national numbers thinking, when's my big payday coming? The answer is, not from chasing national averages. The money's in the micro markets, the pockets, the exceptions. And that's exactly what I'm about to show you. Let's talk about dry van. Because if you're a van operator who didn't pay attention last week, you probably sat for 2 days wondering where all the freight went. Look at these numbers. Atlanta outbound loads, down 19% week over week. Houston, down 14%. Chicago, off 11%. And Dallas fell off a cliff at nearly 30% drop in van volumes. Only 6 out of 135 van markets saw load volume increases last week. 6 out of 135. So what happened? Early holiday freight got stockpiled weeks ago. Retailers front-loaded inventory to avoid drama. Now we're in this weird lull before Thanksgiving, where everyone's sitting around waiting for the next surge. National dry van rate is sitting at $1.69 per mile right now, just a penny above where it was the week before, and only 2% above last year. But here's the split that matters. Port cities and distribution corridors are starting to tighten. Houston port volumes are up because of cargo diversions from the West Coast. Savannah and Charleston are seeing import-driven lanes firm up as retailers position for late holiday shipments. Meanwhile, secondary inland markets? Dead zones. If you're sitting in a secondary market with weak demand waiting for things to magically improve, you're burning money. The play for dry van right now is simple. Get close to ports and major distribution hubs. Southern California to Dallas, southeast to northeast. High-volume lanes that are actually moving freight. Now let's talk reefer. Because this one surprised me. It's Thanksgiving week. The reefer market should be absolutely screaming right now. Turkey, ham, produce, holiday foods. This is supposed to be when reefer capacity gets tight and rates climb. Instead, volumes in the top 10 reefer markets dropped 15% last week. Atlanta reefer loads, down 12%. Chicago, down 12%. Dallas, which is a major food distribution hub, saw reefer volumes plunge 27% in 1 week. Why? Part of it's external. The temporary suspension of SNAP benefits on November 1st in some states cooled produce demand. That's food stamps. Apparently that moves reefer rates more than we thought. But here's the thing. Reefer spot rates still ticked up a penny to $2.09 per mile. That's 2% above last year, and actually 3% above the 10-year average for early November. So the market's not collapsing. It's just not performing like a normal pre-Thanksgiving surge. Now, there are pockets of strength. Missouri, Turkey country, saw a 10% weekly jump in reefer loads. Pacific Northwest still has late-season apple and pear harvests, keeping capacity tight. Border markets like Nogales and McAllen are steady with Mexican produce imports. The smart play for reefer operators: position yourself in food distribution corridors. Upper Midwest for poultry, Southeast for produce, Texas and Arizona border for imports. And whatever you do, keep watching Florida, because that's where things got really interesting last week. Flatbed continues to be the bright spot in this market. Relatively speaking, load-to-truck ratio for flatbed, 21.6. down from the ultra-tight 30-to-1 we saw in September, but still way healthier than dry van's 5.8 flatbed spot rate, $2.05 per mile nationally. That's 8 cents, or 4%, higher than the same week last year. And importantly, flatbed rates held completely flat for the second week in a row. Stability in this market is actually impressive. Now here's what's happening. Residential construction is cooling with the season. Building materials freight, lumber freight, that's slowing down as winter weather hits. But industrial and energy-related flatbed freight is still active. Federal infrastructure spending, expanded tariffs on imported steel fueling steady traffic for steel, pipe, and machinery, especially in Texas, Alabama, and Oklahoma. Last week, we saw some interesting rate spikes in specific markets. Portland, Oregon. Flatbed rates jumped 30 cents per mile to $2.36. Jackson, Mississippi. Rates spiked 30 cents to $2.85 outbound. Even Houston, one of the largest flatbed markets, bucked the softening trend with a 3-cent uptick. The flatbed play for winter. Forget residential construction markets. Target energy and infrastructure projects. Oilfield equipment in Texas and Oklahoma. Pipeline materials in the Gulf Coast. Utility infrastructure in the Southeast year-round industrial work. If you're a flatbed operator chasing building materials in the Mountain West right now, you're in the wrong game. Now let me tell you about Carlos. He's a reefer operator I've known for years, runs a small fleet out of Georgia. Independent guy, smart operator, knows the Southeast produce lanes cold. 2 weeks ago, Carlos is looking at his board and sees Florida loads paying $2.80, $3 per mile, way above market. His first thought, what's the catch? Here's the catch. In late September, Florida turned every single truck weigh station into immigration and English proficiency checkpoints overnight. Half the market decided Florida was too risky and started routing around it. The result? Florida's outbound reefer load post jumped 18% overall Miami area, surged 44% in a single week. Brokers scrambling to find trucks for perishables. Even though Florida's produce season is winding down, the artificial capacity crunch means loads are paying premium. Carlos made a decision. His drivers speak English, paperwork's clean, no compliance issues. So he took 3 Florida runs last week. First load, Miami to Atlanta, $2.95 per mile plus detention because the pickup was delayed at the checkpoint. Second load, Tampa to Charlotte, $2.70 per mile. Third load, Jacksonville to Richmond, $2.65. Meanwhile, his competitor, similar fleet, similar equipment, avoided Florida completely because one of his drivers doesn't speak great English. That competitor ran 3. Georgia to Texas runs at $1.95, $2.10, and $2.05 per mile. Carlos netted an extra $3,000 that week. Same amount of miles. Different positioning decision. Now, here's the thing. Carlos told me, the inspection delays are real. You gotta build in an extra hour at every weigh station. But if you're compliant, that's the cost of doing business in a market where nobody else wants to go. Florida right now is high risk, high reward. If you're compliant with the new rules, there's money there. If you're not, stay away. Let's stay in story mode for a minute, because Texas is the perfect example of why national averages are useless. I talked to a dispatcher last week who works with about 30 owner-operators, mostly dry van. She's got 2 drivers. We'll call them Mike and Tony, both sitting in Dallas at the same time last Monday. Mike looks at his board, sees Dallas outbound loads are soft volumes dropped 30% that week. But he also knows Houston's port is handling increased volumes because of West Coast diversions. So Mike deadheads 240 miles to Houston, costs him about $120 in fuel, gets to Houston. Tuesday morning, picks up a port-import load to Atlanta for $1.95 per mile. Not great, but solid. Delivers Friday, picks up an Atlanta to Houston backhaul at $1.85 round trip. He's moving, he's profitable, he's not sitting. Tony? Tony decides to wait it out in Dallas. The freight's coming, he says. It's almost Thanksgiving. Tony sits Tuesday, sits Wednesday. Finally takes a Dallas to Denver load Thursday for $1.42 per mile because he's desperate to move. That's barely covering his costs. Both drivers, same equipment, same week. Mike's deadhead investment paid off. Tony lost 3 days waiting for freight that didn't show up. Now here's the thing about Texas right now. Southern half is hot. Port activity in Houston, energy sector freight, border produce traffic at Laredo and McAllen, all active northern half around Dallas. Lull after early holiday stockpiling, waiting for the next surge. The lesson isn't always deadhead to Houston. The lesson is, use real-time data to make positioning decisions. Don't wait in dead zones, hoping for magic. And here's the kicker. That dispatcher I talked to, she started routing all her drivers to Houston, South Texas border, or out of Texas entirely. Nobody's sitting in Dallas anymore. We gotta talk about the English proficiency enforcement, because this isn't just a compliance issue anymore. It's a market factor. Since June, inspectors have issued over 23,000 English proficiency violations. About 6,500 drivers have been put out of service for failing to meet the language standard. Now nationally, that's a drop in the bucket. We've got millions of drivers on the road, so 6,500 OOS isn't moving the needle at the macro level, but regionally, it's absolutely creating capacity crunches. Texas leads the nation with 582 out-of-service orders for English proficiency. Wyoming, 469. Tennessee, 397. Arizona, 361. Florida jumped into the top 10 after ramping up enforcement. That's part of why Florida's capacity is so tight right now. Meanwhile, California issued exactly one OOS order. Washington, New Mexico, barely enforcing it. Legal or political factors have slowed enforcement there. So here's what this means for positioning. If you or your drivers struggle with English, you need to be extremely cautious in the enforcement hot zones: Texas, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida, Wyoming. A simple way station stop can turn into a 10-hour OOS order or longer. But flip side, if you're a carrier with fully English proficient drivers, you've got less competition in those lanes right now. Fewer operators are willing to touch them. This is exactly why Carlos could charge $2.95 per mile in Florida. This is why Houston's slightly tighter than comparable markets. The enforcement is creating artificial capacity constraints that are real money for compliant carriers. Know where the risk is highest, get compliant, and either avoid those states or capitalize on the opportunity. All right, let's get tactical. Where should you actually position your equipment right now for the next 7 to 10 days? For dry van operators, position near port cities: Houston, Savannah, LA/Long Beach, major DC hubs, Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago. Watch for Thanksgiving restocking to hit. High volume lanes: Texas to Midwest, Southeast to Northeast. These will tighten late November. Avoid secondary markets with low load-to-truck ratios. Most inland non-port markets are oversupplied. Don't sit there hoping move. For reefer operators, this is your season. Maximize it. Midwest meat and poultry, Missouri, Upper Midwest for turkey and ham shipments, peaking now Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon for late-season produce. Southeast produce belts, Georgia, South Carolina for fall vegetables and frozen foods. Border produce, South Texas, Arizona for Mexican imports. And if you're compliant, Florida outbound. Capacity shortage means premium rates. Just build in inspection time. For flatbed operators, winter's coming, construction slowing. Focus on year-round industries: Houston and Texas, Louisiana Gulf region, oil and gas equipment, metal loads, Southeast infrastructure, Alabama, Georgia federal projects and utility work. Midwest industrial corridor, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes for manufacturing and steel moves. Avoid markets heavy on home construction. Mountain West, New England flatbed freight for building materials is soft until spring. Universal strategy: use load board heat maps. Watch tender rejection rates in specific lanes. When they spike, that's your signal rates are climbing. Don't just chase national averages. And remember Mike and Tony from Dallas? Be Mike. Use data. Make strategic positioning moves. Don't be Tony waiting for freight that isn't coming. Let's wrap this up with what you need to do today, not next week. Today. Action. Item number 1. Check your position. Where are you right now? Pull up your load board. Check the load-to-truck ratio for your current market. If it's below 2-to-1 and dropping, you need to move. Look at the markets I just showed you: ports, distribution hubs, regional hotspots. Map your deadhead cost versus sitting for 48 hours. Run the math. Action item number 2. Verify compliance. This English proficiency enforcement isn't going away. If you haven't already, verify that you or your drivers can handle basic English conversation at a checkpoint. If you can't, either get training or route around Texas, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida, and Wyoming right now. Don't gamble on this. An OOS order costs you way more than the premium rate you might catch. Action item number 3. Plan your next 3 moves. Don't just book one load, plan 3 moves ahead. If you take a load into a dead market, what's your exit strategy? How's the backhaul? Can you turn it into a profitable round trip, or are you deadheading out? The carriers making money right now aren't the ones with the best individual loads. They're the ones with the best 3-load sequences. Chain together moves that keep you in the hot zones or moving between them profitably, the bottom line. The freight market in mid-November 2025 is lukewarm nationally, but hot in specific micro-markets. Florida, selective Texas corridors, Midwest poultry lanes, Pacific Northwest produce, flatbed infrastructure corridors. That's where the money is. The spot market didn't heat up everywhere last week. It heated up in pockets. And the carriers who recognized those pockets and positioned into them, they're the ones who made money. Carlos in Florida made an extra $3,000 by understanding the enforcement dynamic. Mike in Houston stayed profitable by deadheading strategically instead of sitting in Dallas, hoping you've got the same data they had. You've got the same opportunities. The question is, are you going to use them? Check those load boards. Verify your compliance position smart. The next 7 to 10 days leading into Thanksgiving could be strong if you're in the right place. Don't wait for the freight to come to you. Go to where the freight is. That's it for this week. See you next week with another market update. Stay safe out there.